we have some new updates about Phase 7 of the MCU. That's right, the phase coming after Avengers Secret Wars. Or there is the possibility that they could call it Phase 1. It really just depends what they do after Avengers Secret Wars. Is it a full reboot, a soft reboot, no reboot at all? We've heard that it's going to be a soft reboot, and they do this in the comics a lot. So if that is the case and it's rebooted in any way, shape, or form, they could simply go back to Phase 1, but for now, we'll call it Phase 7. And yes, Marvel Studios is planning Phase 7 already. We know this, and Kevin Feige has confirmed multiple times that whatever they have announced, they have 5 to 10 years planned on top of that. So we already know that Marvel Studios has a lot of plans after Secret Wars already, and of course they have to think forward. They have to think into the future. And according to a new report / rumor, they are thinking very far ahead, and we're talking the end of Phase 7. And I have to say, if this report is real, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it would be, in fact, a really good way to end Phase 7 of the MCU. But it also tells us a lot when it comes to the plot of the X-Men in the MCU and kind of what to expect. And on top of that, we have another update on at least one of the big bads coming after Secret Wars. But let's start with the X-Men. According to a report from the insider My Time to Shine Hello, the next saga of the MCU, the mutant saga, is going to end with an Avengers vs. X-Men film. Now, this is not the first time that we've heard about an Avengers vs. X-Men film. A lot of insiders have talked about this. It's very clear at this point in time that Marvel Studios is working on it. In some way, shape, or form, they are trying to figure out an Avengers vs. X-Men film. We thought we might get it in the multiverse saga, but a lot has changed. Marvel has made a lot of changes. No more Kang, Dr. Doom's coming in, Robert Downey Jr. came back as Dr. Doom, the Russo brothers are completely rewriting Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars from scratch, so it really seems like the Avengers vs. X-Men film is gonna come later. But here's why it makes perfect sense to end the next saga, the mutant saga, with an Avengers vs. X-Men film. It all has to do with the story that they start to introduce in the next saga in the beginning. We already know that there's a new official X-Men movie coming in the new saga. Marvel Studios has actually been working on this for a while. We haven't heard much about it in a pretty decent time, but we do know that Marvel Studios has hired Michael Leslie as the screenwriter for it. So this is not the Avengers vs. X-Men film, but an actual X-Men film just focused on them. We assume it's going to set up the actual team in the MCU. And here's what you really need to know. The biggest thing about the next phase is the fact that we're finally going to have a universe that has all of the Marvel characters in it. The X-Men, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers. Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige can basically do whatever he wants now. And it's fantastic. But now we are entering a new story overall. So not a continuation, at least not entirely, from everything we've seen before from the Infinity Saga and the Multiverse Saga. And based on what we've heard has already been pitched to Marvel Studios was something kind of similar to X-Men 97, where the human population of the world doesn't trust mutants. And this is just a very classic and just huge story for the X-Men overall. It has been throughout time. And it makes sense that this is the story that they would go to, because it's such a staple for many different X-Men stories and characters in Marvel history. We've seen it on screen a lot. We've seen it in X-Men 97 very recently. Of course, it's all throughout the comics. And now it seems like it's going to the MCU finally. So if we think about that as one of the main components of the new story of the new saga that we're going into with the X-Men and the MCU, it makes sense that that would end with an Avengers vs. X-Men film. Because again, from what we've heard, it's not going to be a full hard reboot. It's not going to reset everything. Some original characters are going to survive. And although there are times in the comics where people kind of forget their past and whatever universe that they're in that was reset, they kind of believe that to have always been their universe, there are still usually some people who remember the past. And I'm assuming those people are going to be the Avengers or simply just the characters involved with the reset of the MCU. So that could be the Fantastic Four, Doctor Strange, the Scarlet Witch, anybody who's really involved with that reset, with that restoration of the multiverse at the end of Avengers Secret Wars, because we know that the Russo brothers are probably going to destroy the multiverse just like it's done in the Secret Wars comics. So if you think of it this way, when we first get the X-Men in the MCU, they might not easily get along with the Avengers because humanity is kind of against the mutants. I mean, in Captain America Civil War, we already did see a lot of people turn on the Avengers. So this is the same except on a much deeper and bigger level with the mutants. So while I'm sure the X-Men team is going to be established in this next phase and probably will work with the Avengers in the next phase, it seems like over time, people are going to become really skeptical of the X-Men, especially because they are born this way. They are literal mutants. So ideals and beliefs are definitely going to come into play, and I'm sure that the X-Men and the Avengers will work together a little bit or come in contact with each other when the new phase starts, but their ideas about how to go about handling things, handling threats, and handling society as a whole, I'm sure they'll be a little bit different because we have one class of people who are born a certain way, the mutants, and others who come across their powers by other means, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. And that's where we're kind of going to start to get that conflict. I'm sure the Avengers are going to want to help the X-Men because they're also heroes as well. So the Avengers might think, well, if people are starting to think bad of the X-Men, they might start to turn on the Avengers as well. So we should try to help the X-Men, but that's where the differences in ideals might come into play about how to handle this whole situation. So we could have a new Iron Man in the MCU. Reed Richards is going to be there, we know that. And then Professor X all talking but disagreeing on how to handle society. And then of course, we know villains are going to attack and people could blame some villains on the X-Men and the Avengers might do that as well. And it might get to the point to where the Avengers say, hey, X-Men, you need to stand down, or hey, you need to work under us. And they're just going to say no. And then that's where the big conflict can come into play. And then that's where the Avengers vs. X-Men movie comes into play. Now, this clearly is not anything like the Avengers vs. X-Men storyline in the comics, but in the comics, the Avengers and the X-Men have been established for a very long time. This is very different. This is going to be very fresh, very new for this universe, for this saga. So I don't really think the story of the Avengers vs. X-Men in the MCU will be close to the story of the Avengers vs. X-Men in the comics. Although I'm sure we could, of course, eventually get there down the road when the Phoenix Force is involved. Although Namor has already flooded Wakanda, we've already seen that in the MCU, which happens in Avengers vs. X-Men in the comics. But with a universe reset, they could definitely do that again. But one could easily see how the story of the X-Men and how society views them does eventually lead to conflict with the other superhero team, the Avengers. But hopefully, when we get into Phase 8 and Phase 9, they start to play well together and an Illuminati team is eventually established. I cannot wait for that, but we haven't heard anything that far yet. Right now, it sounds like Marvel Studios is really focused on this saga and the next saga because, of course, you have to be prepared. You have to be forward thinking. Marvel Studios isn't just going to take a break after Avengers Secret Wars for a few years. They're, of course, going to keep it going. So they have a plan for the next saga. We know we're getting that X-Men film, and if this report is true, it's going to end with an Avengers vs. X-Men film that I think a lot of people would really love to see. But it also sounds like they have one of their main villains really locked in. We've talked about Annihilus a few times on the channel, and we have a new report about him today. The last time we talked about him, he was appearing in the Nova series as the villain, and I did mention that I didn't think one series would be enough to go through the whole Annihilation story with the Annihilation wave from the comics. And based on a new report from insider Daniel RPK, it looks like Marvel Studios thinks that as well, as he has reported that Annihilus is going to appear in multiple projects in the next phase. So this is great news because it seems like Marvel Studios really is going to set him up to be one of the big bads of the next phase. And I think that's fantastic because I don't think the whole Annihilation story can be told in just one series, especially when we're just first getting introduced to Nova. But so far, the next phase of the MCU sounds awesome. We're getting a Nova series. We're getting Annihilus in the MCU. We get the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers together, an Avengers vs. X-Men film. And a name that has been thrown out there frequently for the villain of the X-Men has been Mr. Sinister. And in fact, we know that an X-Men 97 team was pitched to Marvel Studios for what the new roster should be moving forward in the MCU. Perhaps Mr. Sinister was pitched as well. I think a lot of people would like for him to be the main villain, and I do think it's good to start off his story relatively early with the X-Men entering the MCU. That opens up a lot for the future, and then of course we can build up to other amazing villains like Apocalypse, and I definitely want to see what they do with the story of Magneto. So very, very exciting things coming for Phase 7 of the MCU, but of course we have so many more exciting projects left in the multiverse saga, from Captain America Brave New World to the Thunderbolts, the Fantastic Four, Avengers, Doomsday, Spider-Man 4, Doctor Strange 3, and Avengers Secret Wars, and all of the Disney Plus shows thrown in between. It's a very exciting time right now, and the great news is once it starts to pick up here next month, it's not going to stop. We're going to have a lot of really exciting projects coming even after the end of Secret Wars in Phase 7. So let me know how excited you are about this in the comments down below. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the latest MCU news, rumors, or leaks. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.